You're listening to the Nerdverse Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Anton, and joining the show to discuss Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, an enormous Marvel fan, an incredibly thoughtful and deep thinker, and an expert music analyst, the host of the SojuTalk Kpop Podcast, is Warren. We had a very meaningful conversation on a number of cultural touchpoints throughout the film, and just an overall celebration of the amazing storytelling introducing Shang-Chi in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Coming up, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings discussion on the Nerdverse Adventures. Welcome to the Nerdverse Adventures, episode 1, and joining the show for this inaugural episode, we have the very intelligent, very artistic, and creative human being. He also hosts a K-pop podcast. You guys should check it out, but we'll plug that at the end of the show. We've got Warren. Welcome to the show, Warren.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Happy to be here. Hey man, how you doing?
Hey, it's going really well, and I'm super excited for just like talking about Shang-Chi, talking about this movie, and just everything that connects with the nerdy worlds and nerdy universes that we're all big fans of. And you are probably one person that I've always had in mind to have like these long-form conversations and discussions just about stories within Marvel, within Star Wars, within anything nerdy. Just because the way that you talked about it on SojuTalk, I kind of felt like it needed some space to breathe. I needed a little extra time, a little extra simmering time.
Right.
But we're here, and I'm excited. Let's jump into it. So we've got Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This movie came out earlier this year. It's directed by Destin Daniel Cretton. Just announced this week that he will be doing the sequel, and he's attached to a number of other projects within Marvel. And it's really, to me, it means a lot that someone of Asian heritage, an Asian American, now has this creative outlet, this creative ability within Marvel. So just super excited moving forward. But let me get your big picture takeaways on Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. What'd you think? How'd you feel? And where do you sit now with this movie?
Man, it's an incredible movie, isn't it? I feel like we're spoiling the rest of our conversation there, but there was a certain level of expectation, right? And to be very honest, I went in with lower expectations compared to other people, because I was at a point in my life where, Marvel was fine, but I was at a low point after the huge endgame hype there was. And then I was like, Marvel, like superheroes again. And then I went in and saw it, and I was like, you know what? This was great. I had a fun time. Not many things to complain about. This is great. I don't know how'd you feel about it.
So I will just be honest. I liked Marvel movies up until a certain point, but because there were so many, my lead up expectation and excitement for movies just needed to be tempered, just because there were so many coming out, and honestly, just attention span. I couldn't keep up with every little tidbit moving forward. So I, for the most part, for maybe a better part of 2 years, have tried to limit my expectations and my exposure to Marvel until the movie comes out.
That's fair.
And doing it with this, man, I was extremely pleasantly surprised, just overwhelmed, right? Because on the very visible side of things, it's the first Chinese superhero, Chinese heritage, Asian representation, mirroring kind of our experiences. So of course there's that built-in excitement, but I kind of wanted to let the movie breathe and live on its own before I brought in my own personal history into it. And it does an excellent job balancing both. It's really accessible, but also celebrates culture and heritage in kind of an incredible way. So with all that excitement built up, what worked for you best with this movie? And kind of take me through that theater experience, going back to the theater over, after the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, this was the first movie I saw after the whole lockdown fiasco we had, right? I think it was for a lot of people. I was like, do I keep? I didn't know what to do. Like, do I keep my mask on during the movie? Like, I did. At the end of the day, I didn't even buy popcorn. It was kind of sad. But like, I was kind of concerned. I was like, I don't know where Marvel's headed. Like, kind of similar to you. I was a huge Marvel fan leading up until that point, and I was like, I should kind of mediate the level of excitement I have. And with going in with Black Widow, that dropped a couple months before that. I was hyped about it, but at the same time, I thought it was pretty cool. But at the same time, it felt more like a wrap at the end of everything before it, rather than we're kicking off Phase 4. This truly felt like we're gonna kick off Phase 4 with new faces, right? And then the whole plot does feel like a traditional superhero Marvel thing. And I feel like it does a really, really good job of that. Like, a lot of people I saw were like, oh, the story's kind of cliched. Like, there's a lot of cliched elements in there. Like, and I think they have a point, but at the same time, they play well with each other. Where I was like, you know what, it's very similar to the formula we get very often, but at the same time, it's a tried and proved formula, and there's a lot of new elements, like the different action sequences, the Asian heritage that you mentioned. A lot of those things played a great role in keeping the movie really interesting for me. And I was like, man, like, there were a lot of moments like you where I saw myself in the movie as well, right? And all of that played together. I had a great time in the theater, and I was walking out, and like I mentioned earlier, I went with like a little bit of a low expectation level, and they came out, and I was I was talking to my girlfriend who was with me, and we were both like, that was good. That was good. Like, my girlfriend doesn't even watch Marvel movies. Like, she's not a huge Marvel person. I dragged her to the thing, and we were both like, you know what, this is pretty good. I liked it, and then I was rewatching it a couple nights ago too, and I was like, you know what, rewatchability is kind of there too. I'm not complaining at all. Yeah.
Yeah, you said a lot of great things about just how the story is very accessible. It's something that's familiar,
Yeah.
but they do a lot of really cool things. Kind of digging deep into this story and how it's constructed, there are a lot of elements with the traditional hero's journey. And I think it's a really cool cyclical nature of storytelling feeding into itself, where I'm going to try my best not to, but I will say there are a lot of Star Wars themes in this. So that's my one Star Wars for now. But again, Star Wars is also grounded in Eastern culture storytelling, all summarized very well by Joseph Campbell. If you don't know Joseph Campbell, check him out. He talks about the hero's journey, Hero of a Thousand Faces. I won't go too deep into it, but there are a lot of familiar touch points with this story that are brought into a modern aspect using Asian heritage and culture in the Marvel universe. And I think all of that sings so perfectly well in this symphony of just experience.
Right.
I kind of want to bring in just one last thing before we kind of dig deep into the themes of the movie, but
Yeah.
kind of the cultural touch points and things that were relatable to you.
Yeah.
Were there any that stood out to you? I have a couple in mind, but when I
Cool.
saw them happening, I was just like, oh, I feel seen. I feel really like welcomed into kind of this world now. Like, this is a place that I can live in.
Yeah, like the thing is, I think the movie did a great job of touching several different touch points while being really respectful to them, and that was really, really cool, right? Like, I, for one, because I'm Korean primarily, I'm not Korean American. I'm more Korean than anything. Because of that, I didn't relate to a lot of the Asian American stuff that was going on. That felt more like I knew that my friends would be excited about it because I have a lot of Asian American friends. So prop to that. But the part that I was really, really excited about and very kind of related to was the moment where, like, the main character leaves his home in China, his family in China, and then comes to America at the age of like 14 or 13 or something like that. And the age of 13 or 14 is when I moved from Korea to America too. So like I was like, dang, like his English is really good for like having moved at that time period. Because I know for a fact a lot of the guys who move in that kind of period or point in their lives, like maybe their English isn't all that great. Albeit the plot, does a really good job of covering that point as well. But stuff like that I think was really, really cool. And like the Asian family household dynamic that you have with your parents. Yeah, I didn't know what Chinese American or Chinese families kind of interact with each other, but we're allowed to do spoilers, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, yeah. If you guys haven't still seen it, like, what are you guys doing, right? The dining table sequence where like the siblings, the dad, and Katie were all sitting around the table and they were talking about like family names and all that. I was looking at that and I was like, man, that reminds me so much of like my dad just sitting at the table. We're just eating silently, and he's like, "Yeah, Warren, culture, ancestors, be respectful." And I was like, okay, like that's what Asian dads do. That's Asian dads. If he's an actual Asian dad, he would be wearing like golfing clothes instead of like the cool superhero stuff. But like besides, like it's a movie, like so like those kind of moments where like the general structure of things, because there is a fair bit of overlap between Chinese culture and Korean culture. I saw and I was like, you know what, this I there were moments where I would kind of see them and kind of understand really, really quickly, and I would be like, man, this is not something we see often in like American movies, because like you like I remember seeing Modern Family growing up to learn English. That was the thing I did. And I was like, man, American families are weird. Obviously, now I know it's a sitcom, but like, you know what I mean? Like the dynamics that people have are very, very different. I don't know, man. Like, how do you feel about that?
No, I really appreciated how the touch points were used in a way that told a story, right?
Yeah.
The dining sequence that you mentioned later on in the movie, where the dad is talking to the family almost as a like a head of the household sequence, right? But I also feel like that mirrors so well with the beginning of the movie, where Sean goes to pick up Katie and they're having breakfast. Another dining table sequence, and something
Right.
very traditional to Asian culture in general. It starts off with him taking off his shoes, and a point of emphasis that he took off his shoes before he entered the house. And then he greets the mom, the grandma, and all the elders in a form of respect to sit at the table. And then again to have that interaction with the grandma and that deep connection with the grandma.
Yeah.
I think all of those little subtle moments are a nice way for us as Asian people to kind of see our stories being told in this very unique, fun way, but also kind of
Yeah.
to show like, yeah, the rest of the world, this is kind of how we interact with the world, how we learn about each other, and what family dynamics look to us. And it kind of looks similar in a lot of ways, different in a lot of ways, but I think it all tells a story of what family and family structure means to the characters. And I think
Right.
that is something that's universal, that just really excites me to think about, and really just
Yeah.
makes me feel proud, that this movie
Yeah.
does represent us in a broader sense.
And I know we're gonna touch upon this later too, but like the theme of families, like I felt like that worked so well in this movie. Like the concept of familyhood is like very different for like Asian people and like not very Asian people. And like that plays a critical role in delivering the theme in the movie itself. So like I remember watching the movie and I was like, man, they either really got lucky or calculated everything perfectly so that it's like, working like clockworks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
great. Yeah.
super awesome. A couple other things that worked well for me. I think the comedy was, it had its Marvel flair to it, but I think all of it was very intentional. I think the one that stuck out to me was on the airplane, telling Katie that his name isn't Sean, it's Shang-Chi. And the fact that they emphasize Shang-Chi like a million times, because I think that's speaking to the audience, whether you're Asian American who's never pronounced it correctly, or you're an American person, or you're just any other culture that doesn't know how to pronounce it. I think it does a nice job of, quietly taking a dig at people. It's like, hey, like, this is how you say it. It's not that hard, but also kind of funny. And Aquafina plays that off really well. Were there any other bits of comedy that kind of were your favorite moments?
I think that was one of my favorite moments too, especially because if you have an Asian name in an American society or not Asian society, you're gonna relate to that, and on some level, to some degree. Like, there's a reason I have an English name. you know. Man, I don't know. So I'm trying to think of other moments. I will. A lot of people are complaining about like. I saw a lot of critics complaining that like the comedy is just Marvel humor, and I was like, do you expect Marvel movies to not have I don't know what you're expecting, sir. Like, there was a lot of moments that did feel like very Marvel-y, like the near the climax of the show. Man, I don't remember the actual nouns, but the bad dudes,
The Ten
the
Rings.
army of bad dudes. What?
The Ten Rings.
You're right. The Ten Rings. Oh my
Yeah.
god, the Ten Rings army. They're still fighting the villagers of Talo. And then the dwellers in darkness start flying out, and then the auntie, uh, is that Yingnan? She's like, dude, we gotta work together. We gotta work together to fend off the dwellers in darkness, and Razor, man, I'm so sorry with the names. Razor Hand.
The Romanian with the sword hand.
Right, the Romanian with the sword hand, he goes, "No, I'm not working with you guys." And then like the dwellers come in and then kills like two dudes who are very very strong. And then he's after that he's suddenly like, "Yeah, we're gonna work together." Like stuff like that does feel like very Marvel-y, but there is like a certain charm to it that I think is very very appealing and very very universal. And it so I don't think Marvel should get rid of it. It's it's a good funny aspect. Keep it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of it throughout the movie. Some are hits and some are misses. I don't think that one is a miss in particular because I think it does speak to the scene. Um, to me, I think the ones that didn't work were the Planet of the Apes long monologue in the car, where he talks about learning how to act. Ben Kingsley as the Mandarin. That was a little too long.
Yeah.
And then playing dead on the battlefield again, another Mandarin moment. Got a lot of the Mandarin. I get what they were trying to do to recontextualize him to make him a funny character, but I think having one too many of those in addition to that moment before the battle kind of stunts a lot of the rhythm sometimes, at least
Yeah.
how I see it. But overall, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah. And like Ben Kingsley too, like his funny moments were incredibly well hitting when they were very, very short. Like in the final battle sequence, there's a point where like he's on the ground and like the animal comes around and he's like, trying to wake him up, and then Ben Kingsley gets up and he's like, I'm doing an act, I'm acting. That part was very short. It was to the point. It tells a lot about the character and it was still funny too. Like I remember like audible laughter in the theater when that came out. So like I don't know, man. I do agree with you. Shorter stuff is better hitting.
Yeah. It's just really just hits and misses and how it's all balanced in the movie.
Yeah.
Well, last point I wanted to get to, and we kind of talked about this a bit with the battle sequences, but just overall, what are your thoughts on the fight choreography and the fighting sequences?
That is like probably the highlight of the movie, don't you think?
I loved it. Yeah.
My God, yeah. Like it's here's the thing. It does make Shang-Chi unique in that aspect. Like it's not the type of action sequences you would expect from Thor, for instance. I was watching the background documentary, the behind the scenes stuff. It's on Disney Plus. I think it was Marvel Assembled or something. And it told the whole story of like getting the choreographers that played a big part in Jackie Chan movies and all of those. And I was thinking to myself, that makes a lot of sense. That does make a lot of sense because even from the trailers, I remember like people in the comment section, they were like, "Man, this feels like they're playing a big tribute to Hong Kong action movies, to Chinese action movies from the 90s to the early 2000s." And I think a lot of that does stand out in that aspect. And mark my words, I'm not a huge action person. I'm into Marvel because of the stories and the lore. With all that in mind, like if it appealed to me, if it worked with me, it's gotta have worked for a lot of people. It's something new, it's something fresh for a lot of people, especially like younger folks, I imagine. So I can't complain, like
Yeah, no, I think it does a nice job of paying homage to the Hong Kong style Chinese movies that came out
right.
in the 90s, early 2000s. Jackie Chan obviously
Yeah.
comes to mind. And kind of just a note on the technical aspects of like how it was all played out. A lot of continuous unbroken shots. I think you do get to see the impact of every strike, the struggle of every grapple, kind of the intensity of every flailing body part, but all very choreographed, but also in realistic way in the sense that everyone is a trained martial artist killer in this movie. So it all makes sense as to why it does feel so seamless and smooth up until the point of the end of the fight, wherever that is, whether that's Sean running through the buildings in Macau or fighting his dad at various points in the movie. I think all of it plays really well, and just it's very beautifully shot relative to how all the other Marvel movies have been shot as far as action sequences, because you are seeing martial arts as opposed to martial arts based from Eastern cultures as opposed to a mix of different fighting styles throughout the different movies, which I think also adds to the cultural relevance and weight of what this movie does represent.
Right.
All right. Well, let's jump into some of the themes. We like to dig a little bit deeper and discuss, how these themes affect the story, affect the characters, and what resonates with us. So the first one I like to go through is kind of the conflicting moral dichotomies throughout the movie, and I listed three. I'm going to throw them at you, and I want you to kind of take it wherever you want. So we have power versus respect, vengeance versus justice, and then rage versus compassion. So kind of what are the underlying internal or external conflicts that you see spread throughout the movie, either with characters, different themes, or just thematically?
Man, no, this is interesting. I remember there was one in particular I wanted to talk about, and you took it out.
Oh, which one was it? I don't remember.
Didn't you have one about the family and respect?
I think
Maybe I'm making
I
things
might
up.
have lumped that into power and power versus respect. And
Gotcha.
families.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, but I do feel like all the theming here plays a major role in terms of setting up the plot, especially towards the second half of the movie, right? Because Won Woo is obviously after the dead mother, and with the children, you have the brother who has essentially run away from his situations to find new life, and then you have the sister who was left in the darkness afterwards. So she's very angry about that. She's obviously in that aspect, she's trying to find vengeance there, which is, I think, pretty clearly outlined in the first couple sequences with her. And then you have the whole dynamic where Wonwoo is clearly seen as a figurehead of respect and figurehead of power in the family, because he is the father of the family. He is the main dude of the family. And then I think with like rage and compassion there, he is acting upon just the pure emotion of trying to find his dead wife. And there's a moment in the movie where, like, it's one of the flashbacks where it's the younger actor, not the older actor, but the child actor of Shang-Chi follows his dad to go to the one who is going to track down the gang who's essentially killed the mother. And there's a sequence in which we see the movie from the child's lens per se, the child's perspective, and you see the sequence where your figurehead of respect has suddenly become so driven by this one emotion, just anger. So you see a lot of these positive and negative things kind of mix, especially with the father figure, which I think, going back to the whole Asian thing, is something a lot of people experience with their own fathers. So that really worked well. But it didn't really tell the stereotypical thing of like good versus bad in that aspect. So I think that, I don't know, I think that really, really works really well.
So yeah, like we were saying about the complex family dynamics and kind of the way that it was depicted, I clung on to that on my second and third viewing, that it is a subversion of a lot of traditional reference points, right? There isn't a specific good versus evil, hero or villain that you're following. Yes, there are two sides of a coin, right? Shang-Chi is your main character, your protagonist, and the antagonist is the father. But in a lot of ways, like you said, kind of echo how it's very complex and rich, is the fact that he's not really the traditional villain in the sense that you hate him, you want to conquer, you want to beat him, right? you understand where he's coming from. You understand that he has tried to become a reformed person because he's found family, he's found love, and you understand the trauma of losing the person that has changed you for the better, only to go back to what you know. And what he knows is a life of conquest, a life of searching for power, and a life of killing. You know, essentially going after the mob that killed his family, that killed his wife, and reverting back to using the Ten Rings for evil. Right. Kind of an aside. I think the Ten Rings is an excellent device where it's morally ambiguous. Right. It's morally inert. It's not a tool of just power and destruction. It can also be a tool to bring and unite people together. And I think it's done so subtly throughout the movie that, some movies will be very heavy-handed with how they do it. I can't name any off the top of my head, but there's always like that item where it's like, this item does this one thing. It's the MacGuffin, where the Ten Rings is a background theme throughout the entire movie to kind of touch on a lot of the points that we were talking about, whether that's power and respect. How do you gain that, right? You can gain that with the Ten Rings in a number of approaches, but it's how you do it and why. What are the motivating factors? Same thing with vengeance and justice. I think there's a certain point where you do want justice for what's happened to you, but there is a line where now it becomes revenge. And whether that's depicted through the father, restarting the Ten Rings and killing everything in his way, or his sister, the daughter, right?
Right.
Starting her own empire. And then at the end, you have rage and compassion, where those are two complete different sides of the spectrum, right? Where you can be so overcome by this one emotion. It's when you're able to step back and forgive and really reflect on why you're doing something that you can get to the point of compassion. Sometimes you get to the point where you can make amends and change, and sometimes you get to the point where all you see is red, all you see is rage. Yeah, no, I think, the Ten Rings is an excellent starting point for how to kind of unfold and unwrap a lot of these themes. But Warren, did you have any closing thoughts about like how these themes were incorporated throughout the movie?
No, I totally agree with you. I feel like the tool and the weapon that is Ten Rings, it's used both as a visual depictor and a plot-wise depictor in terms of like how respect is flowing between multiple characters. And one sequence that stands out to me near the end is like they're doing the final battle between Wenwu and Shang-Chi, and like at one point Shang-Chi gains control of 5 of the rings, then Wenwu has 5 of the rings, and they start going ham with each other. And I started seeing that, I might be reading too much into it, but I started seeing that almost as a shift in terms of respect, where the father is kind of coming to terms and accepting his son for who he is. Because the son did change a lot in America. He's wearing Jordans for all sakes, right? Like, so like it felt almost like the father who has seen his son change, coming to terms and accepting that. And in the final sequence, when he's being eaten up by the big baddie, he sends all 10 rings to his son, and I was like, okay, like maybe it could be as simple as the father accept just loving his son, but it almost felt like overcoming the conflicts that Wenwu had, and kind of resolving everything in a nice kind of visual manner,
Yeah. I love the way that they incorporated the Ten Rings throughout the movie, very subtly throughout the background of the internal conflicts of the characters, but definitely present in what they are essentially going after.
Right.
Yeah, to kind of let's dig a little bit deeper into the family and the family aspect of the movie. So this is something that has touched us greatly, and it's this idea of filial piety, right? It's a very Asian
Oh boy.
idea, right? So I pulled up the definition on Wikipedia. So filial
boy. Okay.
filial piety per Wikipedia, in Confucian, Chinese, Buddhist, and Taoist ethics, filial piety is a virtue of respect of one's parents, elders, and ancestors. I think what Shang-Chi does an excellent job of portraying is kind of that balance and conflict of bringing a lot of those traditional feelings and things that you've learned through your family into the modern era, into being a millennial, into being a person growing up on the internet. Warren, how did you connect kind of with these moments throughout the movie, and were there any moments like this that kind of stood out to you, saying like, hey, I'm Korean, but I kind of see where that's coming from.
Oh, filial piety is like the backbone of Korean society as much as it is for Chinese people, I think. Man. Oh, so we say hyo instead of shao, which both of mean the same thing. Confucianism. Um, it always felt it's too still I cannot wrap my head around like when I go to my buddy's home with his parent where he lives with his parents, and this is just some American dude. He'll be like very casual with his mother, and I'm like, am I allowed to do that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'll be all polite, oh, hello, Mrs. Whoever, and then she'll be like, yeah, how's it going, man? And I'll be like, yeah, it's going good, man. Oh, so that I always felt like kind of a disconnect with, and like at this point, people of our generation are aware of it. They're aware that Asian people have a kind of a different dynamic with their parents than they do with if you're just normal suburban American or something. I don't know. And I felt like the movie did a really really nice job of portraying that. Like there's a moment where, for instance, Katie's grandmother is in the dining table, and Shang-Chi walks in, and he's like very respectful towards her as well, even though she's not his grandmother, right? But she is still an older person, so we treat them with respect that they are due. The filial piety, that's what it's all about. So I did feel like it was portrayed really really nicely, and not like just kind of glossed over. Yeah, it was there was a lot of moments where it felt like it wasn't just done for the sake of it, right? I mean, going back to the whole thing with the father, right? That it's essentially plays a big role in the plot, because if you see your dad as an equal or something similar to that, Shang-Chi would have acted very, very differently throughout the movie, Like, maybe he would have been less scared when he figures out 10 rings are coming after the gem necklace, maybe he would have acted more differently in the climax. And the whole part where he really just, gets it together and starts, going against his dad, that whole part, I think, would have been very different emotionally. And to the degree, going back to the movie, I feel like I related to it, obviously, because I have concept of filial piety built into my head at this point. But at the same time, I felt, and don't quote me on this, but I still felt like even if I wasn't Asian, right? Even if I wasn't any variety of Asian, I still would have been convinced, because the movie does a great job of making sure that the being respectful to our elders. I feel like the movie did a great job of portraying that throughout the entire movie, and kind of making sure that film goers understand what it is all about when in an Asian household.
So there's a moment where Michelle Yeoh's character Ying
Mm-hmm.
Nan is training Shang-Chi.
Right. Oh yeah.
They're in the village, and he wants to learn how to defeat his father, right? And it goes into conflict and kind of a contrast of this idea of filial piety, where now he wants to become his own person, but in order to do that, he has to, in a way, conquer his demons, his father. But she says this very poignant line in the movie that resonated a lot with me, and it's, "You are a product of all who came before you, the legacy of your family, the good and the bad. It is all part of who you are." So when you saw this in the theater and saw this on screen, what were some of the things that you attached to, as far as these words being said in a movie, in a Marvel movie? And this is probably like a bigger thing, but how do you connect this with filial piety? How do you connect this with this idea of respecting your elders and family, when also trying to develop your identity and who you are?
Yeah. This is almost too difficult to explain, because it's like a default thought of mind, like a state. It's a default state of mind for all of us, especially because I grew up in Korea, where like there's an entire chapter in one of your textbooks about respecting your elder. That's a big deal over there, guys. I didn't really see. Here's the thing: leading up into Shang-Chi, I wouldn't have defined any part of filial piety as people who have come before me make up who I am. I didn't think about it that way, right? I just didn't think about it that way. But at the end of the day, I was coming out with it. I was like, that's a fair take, you know? Not really. You know what? Fair is not the right word. If anything, it's kind of changed the way I see things, right? I guess it's convinced me to a certain degree because at the end of the day, I am a byproduct of my parents. If they didn't get married, I wouldn't be here. You know, like if my grandparents didn't get married, I wouldn't be here. And the actions they took historically, like the stuff they did in the Korean War, the stuff they did back in the days of Shogun, stuff like that, because they did the actions they did, I am now here right now. And that sentence, I remember rereading it in one of the Reddit threads afterwards, and I was like, yeah, that's a really good way to look at it, because sometimes I don't know how to describe this whole respecting your elder thing to like other people, because they'll be like, why do you make such a big deal out of it? And I'm like, I don't know how to explain. And you know, from a movie making perspective, that was a very convincing way to tell it, right? Like, I don't know, maybe should I start expecting like random Americans to be like be really respectful to their families? I don't know. Yeah. How'd you feel?
Yeah, I thought it was done with a lot of compassion, not just for the characters in the moment, but also the audience. Because I think,
Yeah.
like you, I had this conflict my entire life, like pushing back against what my parents and what elders told me, but also wanting to be respectful and, at least acting like I'm listening, giving the idea that I'm listening. But again, everything's sinking in, right? Because you're exposed to it your entire life. At least I was, in the sense that even if I was pushing against something, it was so embedded in how I was taught to experience the world, how I was taught to interact with people who are older than me,
Right.
and kind of the lessons that you should be looking out for when talking to an older person. Those lessons may not hit you immediately. You may not be super cognizant of them in the moment, but I think over time it does stick with you, and I think it does speak to this idea of you are the sum of all of your experiences and your history, whether that's directly or indirectly. And I don't know, I think it helped me reflect on what this movie meant as far as being an analog for Asian culture, but also the things that millennials, Asian Americans, immigrants to the United States who now have to work with this mixed culture and mixed background, and mixed expectations. And what does that all mean as far as making sense of it, right? I think that moment helped me make sense of all of my life experiences in such a deep way, only for it to be flipped into this fantastical martial arts movie, where now I get to see someone who kind of looks like me do really cool things, and I'm actually
Yeah.
like now more connected with this idea, right? Again, I think this does a nice job of mirroring this idea of complexity, where you know there isn't necessarily a good and bad, strict hero and villain in this movie. And I think that, in a lot of ways, is filial piety over the course of history, over the course of how we've adopted it as Asian Americans or Asian people moving into Western cultures. Yeah, no, it's excellent. Kind of one last thing I'd like to ask you
Yeah.
about. So there is again, I keep saying this word, but it's a very complex relationship between father, son, and daughter. How did that all hit you throughout the movie as you're starting to learn more and more about the relationship, how they interact, and kind of the breaking point as to push Wenwu into a direction of, back into the Ten Rings, but also in a lot of ways pushing his children away?
Man, I don't know. Like, the thing is, I'm an only child, so I didn't have like a sister figure to kind of relate on a personal level with. So let me look at it from the outsider lens, right? Because for me, when I was growing up, like everyone around me had a sibling, like whether that be another brother or another sister, and they would never get along. Like it's like period. Like if it was a brother and a sister, they're just eternal rivals for some reason. And it was always like that. And to a degree, I felt like by the time I got to college and afterwards, they would kind of drift apart physically, but somehow mentally kind of make up for the conflicts they had in the past. I'm assuming now that they're far apart, they understand the importance of each other and they're like being nice to each other again. That's the internal conclusion I've reached. And to a degree, that's kind of what happens here too, right? Because they fall apart. They have the whole thing where Shang-Chi leaves for America and never comes back and leaves behind his sister. So he kind of goofed up there. He kind of effed up there, right? But they're able to make up for it, near the end because they understand the concept of a family and what ties them together. And they're really able to kind of see things from each other's perspectives. So yeah, at the end of the day, that was kind of my takeaway with it. I remember reading another internet comment where they were like, "I have a sister that looks like Shali. I hate her as much as if I was Shang-Chi, like that kind of deal." And so I think it works really well for a lot of people. How'd you feel?
Yeah, I think what you said about time away from a sibling really puts into perspective what you meant to each other in the moment, right? Whether that's through trauma, whether that's through struggle, whether that's just through growing pains. And I think you described it really well in the sense that with the way that the story overall played out, just coming back together, and ultimately they are family. They do need each other, but they've found their own path and they've gone their own way. But it's the strength and love of family that really unites them and brings them back together. And I think that is very well represented in this movie, but also I think a universal theme of how siblings just get along. And you always have like the overlooming parent figure, right? That hovers over you throughout your entire life, whether you're an only child or you have siblings, where it's just like, oh, am I meeting expectations? Do I have your approval? Always kind of seeking that. And kind of that push and pull up until you get to a certain point in adulthood, or even in Sean's case, 16, runs away, figures things out. But again, your parents are always looking over you, and they always have an eye on what you're doing, as he so brilliantly says. I've known where you were for 10 years to live your life, and now it's time to come home.
The moment he said that, I was like, man, like my mom would say stuff like, "I know exactly what you're doing. I have eyes on the back of my head." I'm like, God dang, like these Asian parents saying the same thing over and over again in different formats. That's what I got.
Yeah. Let's kind of shift a little bit here. So we've got one theme that I felt was a very mythic theme that I think was threaded out throughout the entire movie. And it's this idea of stagnation versus flow, right? So I think it's very well depicted in the fighting styles and the evolution of the fighting. So you have Wonwoo with the 10 rings. Everything is a strike. Everything is aggression. Where you have their mother, Yingli Li.
Yingli, yeah.
Everything is flow, which is very well visually depicted through the elements, whether that's wind, water, earth. It's all about redirection. It's all about defense, but also humility in what you're trying to accomplish, right? How do you feel like this idea of stagnation and flow was threaded throughout the movie, whether that was in the fight choreography or just kind of the personal journeys of a lot of the characters, specifically Shang-Chi and Katie being millennials?
Yeah, I felt like the action sequences, like you mentioned, is a great depiction of that, because I think Tai Chi is the specific action style they went with for like the Ying Li and Tao Lo, their kind of fighting style. And then for the father's side, or Wanu's side, you have a lot. I think it was some mix of boxing and a couple of, I forget, but yeah, I do agree. The fighting styles and the way they're incorporated into like depicting the different sides of the family, I think it was a great example of showing stagnation and flow. I'm trying to think about the the millennial part.
I can talk
I
about
don't
it a
know.
little bit. So
Yeah.
near the beginning of the movie, they have drinks at the bar with their friends, and one of them is a lawyer, and she's, I would assume, with a long-term
Oh.
partner. And then you have Katie and Sean, just talking about life, and you find out,
Mm.
they're valet drivers, and then she kind of says, I had to grow up, and it's this
Right.
kind of moment of realization where, they're kind of the lost millennials. They're
Mm.
happy with their life, but are they truly content? They want to do more. They feel like they have so much potential. They internally know they have so much potential, but they don't want to hear from anyone else, right?
Right.
And
Right.
it's this idea of, I think, being stuck in a moment but not knowing you're stuck, and then finding whatever it is, that call to action to get you in the flow of learning more about yourself and
Mm.
trying to discover that. As it relates to kind of the characters themselves, I think Katie is a nice analog for us, right? Because by the end of the movie, by the time she is preparing for war, and she has that little discussion with one of the weapons masters, she says this very poignant line about pointing an arrow, right, and training. And she says, "If you aim at nothing, you hit nothing." I
Mm.
think that was a nice moment for her, where it got her thinking about which direction she wants her life to be moving in. Even if she doesn't know exactly, it's really the forward progress that she wants to make as far as affecting herself and the rest of the world and people around her. Yeah, it's just,
Gotcha.
well, let me ask you this personally. So, just being a millennial,
Yeah.
and kind of having that feeling of stagnation and flow at different points in your life, was there any specific life moment that you kind of reflected on and said, I was there? And did you kind of think back as to, like, this is me in that moment at the bar with my friends talking about, I'm happy with this, and you're telling me I could do more, but I don't want to because you're telling me to.
All right. So that's me right now. Because I'm in a situation where, like, in my career, I'm kind of happy with where I am, but I know for a fact I could be working harder. I know for a fact I could be, trying to progress things faster. And the hardworking Asian kid from like high school would have probably advocated for that, but at the same time, I'm kind of enjoying where I am. So on a personal level, man, like here's the thing, like I've never been a huge party goer, like I didn't have like an incredible wild phase through a college or anything. Um, so there wasn't a point where I was like, oh, I need to stop partying so I can, get my life together. That kind of never really happened for me. But at the same time, I'm always questioning myself. Am I going in the right direction? Am I going at the right velocity? Is my life moving in a direction where I would be satisfied in 10 to 15 years? And that I'm at this point in my life, I'm never going to know. I'm never going to know until I actually get there. And it's a constant barrage of questions. And I think going back to Shang-Chi, the movie does a great job of like showing that conflict, internal conflict with the characters. And what was really memorable for me at the end of the day was there's in the beginning there's a karaoke scene. And at the end of the movie, after every adventure with Wong, they end up in the karaoke again. And that to me felt almost heartwarming. Not simply because they're friends hanging out. That part is cool too. But even after all of these adventures, even after achieving so much personal growth, both with Katie and Shang-Chi, they haven't changed at the core. You know what I mean? Like they are still who they are at the beginning of the movie, but they have had a lot of personal growth. So going back to your two word choices with stagnation and flow, I feel like they almost achieved both of them at the same time by the end of the movie. And maybe that's the way I should look at it. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud here. Like I'm trying to find I'm trying to find logic in this internal barrage of questions that I ask myself every day. Um, yeah, man. I don't know. Do you feel like you're stopped, or do you feel like you're moving along? How does that feel for you, man?
I think it's a long, big circle. I don't know where I'm
Mm.
at in it. All I know is, kind of like a ring, the 10 rings. Everything
Ooh.
comes back to the beginning, but I don't know where I am in that journey yet.
Mm.
But I do know, like you said, like fundamentally, we are the people that we are. at our
Mm-hmm.
core, whether that's people with empathy, with great compassion for our friends and family, love of being around other people, celebrating in karaoke. You end up where you began, but in a changed way. And I think I'm slowly learning that. And I can't put words to it just yet, but I know eventually I'll get to a point where I can sit back and reflect on it, and perhaps that'll be the moment where I'm kind of back looped in the circle in the ring. So it's
Oh man, you're finding your karaoke moment. Let's go.
I gotta get there slowly. One last
One day,
thing
man.
about like
Yeah.
stagnation and flow, about the fighting sequence and the way that they fought. I thought it was a great cyclical storytelling moment that they used
Oh
the
yeah.
two fighting styles at the beginning of the movie and the end of the movie.
Mm.
So you had the father and the mother fighting, redirection, and then by the end, Shang-Chi learns that fighting style, and you see the exact same move being mirrored where he's redirecting his father's arm in that same
Mm-hmm.
circular motion. I think that was just a nice bit of poetry. Was there anything that stood out to you about the way those two fight sequences were choreographed and placed at the beginning and the end of the movie?
Yeah, it's visual rhyme, right? It's like a rhyme. It's like poetry. It rhymes. I'm sorry, we're quoting Star Wars too much in the famous words of George Lucas. But no, I memes aside, I definitely felt like it worked, right? Because you start with a very stark contrasting depiction of these two different styles, especially after you see a sequence of one move take over everybody. And then he goes into the forest and he's like, oh no, what is this different style? And then you see that exact same struggle at the end of the movie. So seeing it at the beginning, seeing it at the end, kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier, even before that, like comes full circle, all and around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a visual metaphor. It's a metaphor for the title. It's a metaphor for the rings. God, it's amazing. It's beautiful. It's again, it's probably the reason why it's one of my favorite Marvel movies is because it has these types of layers to it. And let's end with this theme of the movie for this section. I feel like again it always circles back to Star Wars, but it's this idea of
Oh boy.
learning from the past, right?
Mm.
In in this movie, we do have a very real life manifestation of your past demons, with Wonwoo essentially looking to capture or possess something that is no longer there, fighting his demons and releasing the dweller in the darkness.
Mm.
How do you feel like that being the ultimate monster that they have to fight, being a representation of their inner demons, was a nice kind of endpoint for their journey as characters, but then also a transcendent moment where now Shang-Chi is the bearer of the Ten Rings.
Mm. It almost feels like he's carrying on that internal conflict with himself, right? Except at this point, he's kind of resolved it within himself, if that makes any sense. The whole issue with your mother passing away at a young age, it traumatizes the dad, it traumatizes the kids. That's pretty much psychologically proven at this point. It's pretty much gonna very, very be likely to happen. But it almost felt symbolic. It felt like a metaphor of him being able to resolve that internal conflict with him and being able to move on, right? That was also like a big part of the big thematical part of the movie, right? Like being able to accept what happened and being able to move on and leave the past in the past. Um, I felt like he was able to truly do that, especially as you mentioned, because the dwellers in the darkness was more of a symbol of the internal conflict that Wonwu goes through, you know. Um, but yeah, that's how I got it. How about you?
Yeah, no, I think in addition to Shang-Chi and being kind of this culmination of his journey, I also think it was a journey for the father, Wonwu.
Mm,
Because he does get to a point of being so consumed by this idea of holding on of possession, holding on to
mm,
something, right, the past,
mhm,
and
mhm,
I'm going to echo what you said earlier about literally giving the rings to his son. I think it plays into so many different visual metaphors throughout the movie, whether that's opening his palms, similar to like the fighting style that you would later see with the mother and Shang-Chi, literally passing down what he has known to his son. um,
mm,
And again, the Star Wars of it all, Return of the Jedi, when Luke Skywalker throws down his lightsaber to save his father, but it's ultimately the father that saves the son, and the son saves the father in that circular motion. Very similar here at the very end, where Shang-Chi does have a moment where he has the 10 rings, but he lays them down only for his father to pick them up again, because he needs to give his son the 10 rings. He needs to give him the approval, the passing down of the family legacy. And I think, again, it ties back into this learning from the past, where, again, yes, Shang-Chi is learning from his father, but I think it's his father learning from his past mistakes, that you can never be too old to kind of reflect on where you are in life and kind of seeing what you need to do to carry on your legacy, to move on. And yeah, it's just all so beautiful, it's all there, it's things that, if you just engage with it, it's all there.
It's your poetry. It's all there, man.
Yeah. I did want to ask you one thing about the sister. How do you feel like she learned from a lot of these moments, whether that was the passing of their mother, or realizing that, brother's not coming back, I need to do my own thing, or even the simple fact that she was never trained and yet she had to work twice as hard to start her own empire that her father was never going to give her?
Honestly, I felt like this is one thing that Marvel could have been better at in developing in the movie, because she has a very, very interesting like a story arc, right? She's the neglected child because she's the girl, and then like she has to learn things on her own. She creates a whole empire of her own, and then she ends up taking over the 10 rings by herself, without any other Mandarin in charge. And really, I felt like, sure, the movie depicts what happened, right? Like she was left in the dark after her brother left. But really, I don't know. I felt like that was even more interesting of a plot than the dude who's been trained by his dad. I mean, not to say Shang-Chi's not interesting, but at the same time, like, for the amount of exposure we get to the little sister and the important role she plays, and the role she has in the family, I don't know. I felt like that was, even though the movie is already long, I felt like that could have been something that we could have paid a little more attention to in the movie, and maybe that's something we pay a little more attention to in the upcoming Shang-Chi sequel. I don't know, or a whole series by herself. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, that's how I got with Shali. How'd you feel about that?
Yeah, no, that it's I love her character. I think she has a lot of depth. I do think the trick was trying to incorporate her story as much as possible in parallel to us, the audience, learning about Shang-Chi. And I think that was probably always going to be difficult, but it did give us wanting more. And I, for one, like, I want a series. I want a movie. I want something where we're now exploring her and what she learned throughout this movie, and whether she's going to make the same decisions. It doesn't seem like it as her brother, but you know, going in a different direction. How does she forge her own path, and what does she feel is right for her? I think those are the questions that are most interesting to me.
I totally agree. And I feel like Marvel fans say this all the time. They're always like, "Oh, this character needs their own little thing. They need their own Disney Plus series or a movie." I feel like Shali actually needs like a whole solo thing, because I don't think she should be incorporated with Shang-Chi going forward. Maybe they should still keep in touch, obviously, but I feel like they're going so much of a different path, where like she has so much of a story to tell compared to Shang-Chi over here, who has to play the main role of Shang-Chi, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To kind of close this out, I'd like to leave us with a quote from Yoda from The Last Jedi, and it's simply this: "They are what." I'm going to run that back. Yoda from The Last Jedi. "We are what they grow beyond." So to kind of tie everything back together, learning from the past, it really is a story about the next generation taking what they've learned from their parents, their elders, and how do you move that into your future, forging your own path. And in this case, a modern society, whether that's in, a different dimension, not in Talo, or Kind of just being a millennial in San Francisco, because I feel that I'm geographically very close to that city, so I
You're essentially that in the
recognize
West Coast.
everything about what they're going through, whether that's physically or emotionally. Let's move on to MCU connections. The larger Marvel Cinematic Universe. There were a few in the movie. I'll start with you, Warren. What were some of your favorite moments, and was your tinfoil hat on? Did you have any thoughts about how this all connects with the larger storytelling?
Yeah, Mephisto. Sorry. Here's the thing. When I was watching the movie, I was trying to leave out anything Marvel as much as possible because this is a new guy. He's got his story. It doesn't need to be another tie into Avengers. That's the mind I was going in with. And then I think the movie stood alone by itself really, really well. And at the end, Wong shows up and he's like, "Dude, you've opened a whole new door, buddy. Literally, like you gotta come see this real quick, because you're in for some shit." and they go to the place in New York and see all that. And here's the thing, like at the end of the day, like I'm very glad that Shang-Chi was able to appeal to the audiences by itself without needing to rely on another Iron Man or Captain America or Thor for that matter. If anything, I'm still very, very excited about what this means for the rest of Marvel, because I'm expecting this guy to join Avengers one way or the other, right? I think everyone's kind of expecting that. And it's going to be it's one thing seeing Shang-Chi by himself in the movie, but I think it's going to be even more interesting to see Shang-Chi interact with an entire ensemble cast, especially because looking at the upcoming lineup of potential Avengers members, it looks like it's gonna be pretty diverse. Not gonna lie. So it's one thing to portray Shang-Chi in a way all by himself in his own movie, but what's that gonna look like in the other whole MCU world with the other Marvel characters? I don't know. That's what I think what a lot of people are curious about. So in that aspect, going back to your original question, my favorite moment was at the very, very end when Wong shows up and he's like, "Dude, what have you done?" And you know, we'll see what happens next, man. Like, I'm excited for Shang-Chi. I hope he randomly shows up in one of the after credit scenes of something. Spider-Man, I hope. I don't know, something like.
It definitely leaves the door open for a lot of mysticism, right?
Right.
And a lot of the magic that goes beyond the Ten Rings. I think this is also another strength of the Ten Rings itself, is that it's a lot of tip of the iceberg storytelling, where you understand that it's a magical, powerful item, but none of it is explained. And I kind of love it, because you kind of just accept that this is the fantasy of what's happening that resides somewhere in the Marvel universe that somehow connects. And then you're able to add these tags at the end of the movie where it's like, yes, like we know a lot of this magic stuff is happening over here, so now we have our attention over here, we're going to bring you along. So yeah, it's very exciting to see that. For me, and then you touched on this a bit, I love the idea that Marvel has quietly, very subtly snuck into everyone's brain that we are going to be extremely diverse. We're going to have perhaps a female-focused, female-centric set of stories now coming at you, and you are just going to accept it, because guess what? These are all characters that you've lived and breathed with now for a good couple of years. I'm going to just name them off. We have Sharon Carter, prominent part of Falcon and Winter Soldier. Yelena, Natasha's sister, kind of stole the show in that movie. Xiaoling, amazing in this movie. We do want more of her storytelling. And most recently, we've got Kate Bishop. So to me, I feel like this is a shift in Marvel saying, we're just going to sneak in a lot of these female characters, and now you're going to get what you've always wanted or you didn't know you wanted, which is all these female superheroes that are doing amazing things that you accepted already in a lot of like weird psychological ways. But yeah, what did you think about that? About now, like we've kind of assembled this female-centric type of storytelling that, to me, I feel like it's just going to be accepted like that without even a blink of an eye.
I mean, frankly, I didn't even notice it until a couple months ago. And like, I guess I knew it was happening because like I expected some new kind of Black Widow to show up after Black Widow. Like Sharon Carter was there for a while, Wanda was there for a while. We've had sequences in Infinity War and Endgame where it was like highlighting the female characters of the ensemble. Like in Infinity War, there's a sequence where one of Thanos' daughters with the blue hair shows up and she's fighting against Okoye and Black Widow and then eventually Wanda. And then if you go into Endgame, there's a whole sequence where Captain Marvel is like, "Oh, I'll take the gauntlet and, deliver it to, where it needs to be." And then the entire female cast shows up, to deliver the whole thing. And I think those two are amazing examples of two different things. The first one, I think, was amazing. Like it was very natural and very, very convincing, and it did a really good job of portraying these characters. And then I walked out of the theaters after watching the second sequence in Endgame, and me and my buddy, we were talking like that felt like we understand what they were going for, but at the same time, it felt like it was kind of random. Like what is Mantis gonna do to help Captain Marvel? Like Captain Marvel doesn't need Mantis' help. She's already really strong by herself. You know what I mean? So it comes down to this. I'm at the end of the day right now. I'm like, I'm really really excited for it, but at the same time, I saw a lot of people in the comments that were like, oh, like this is being forced. Like this is not what you want. But I feel like if you don't pay attention to the fact that they're of the opposite gender or whatever race they are, it makes sense at the moment. Doesn't feel forced. It makes sense for these characters to be joining where they are. Like I'm trying to think of an example. That people weren't liking. The examples people aren't liking are from shows that haven't aired yet. Like there was a couple of weirdos who are like freaking out over the fact that Ironheart is gonna be about like a random black girl instead of Harley Quinn, which we saw in Iron Man 3. And I'm like, okay, it's fine, but like, why don't we watch it and see how it plays out? Because at the end of the day, given what we saw with Shang-Chi, I feel like they're still gonna do a great job of telling a story that's exciting for people outside that representation to watch. Because I know I enjoyed Shang-Chi. I know my white buddy watched Shang-Chi and liked it. He ain't Asian, and he was still excited. So, I for all the naysayers out there, I feel like we should wait it out, and you should just see it happen, watch it happen, and not focus so much on the diversity aspect of it. Even though that's what most of our conversation has been about today.
Yeah, no,
yeah.
No, everything you said is excellent, right? Where it's this idea of letting it happen organically, naturally within the storytelling. If the story presents it, then let the story play out, see how it's executed, and then make your judgment, your decision on what you feel about it. Kind of like going into it, with this preconceived idea of it's not going to work, then of course you're going to have a negative feeling about the story, however it plays out. I just think overall, with the way that Marvel has solely shifted, they've done a really nice job of incorporating little bits and pieces of diversity here and there. We all love that word, but it's kind of what it is, right? But in a very natural way where it serves the story and it serves a purpose, right? I think the why is the far more important part about all of this, as opposed to the what and the how. And I feel like those are the two elements that people get stuck on, where it's, does it play a part in the story, and is it telling a story in the Marvel universe that we have yet to see? And they'll figure out the why and the what and the how all later, right?
Right.
And to me, I think they've done an excellent job with this, and I think they've done an excellent job over the past year of incorporating different points of view. And I think it's all just good stuff moving forward. Warren, you host a music podcast, a K-pop podcast. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about music to end our conversation. So a very successful soundtrack was released along with Shang-Chi this year. We had the 88 Rising soundtrack with a number of amazing Asian and Asian American artists from all parts of the world. So Rich Brian is definitely the one that everyone knows, Indonesian kid. We also have Nikki, but we also got some Korean representation. We got DPR live, and Ian. BB was there. You got some Seori. What did you think about the album, and what was your favorite song?
Man, the album. Okay, the album was very diverse, right? So I have to preface this and say that I tend to get very critical with music. 'Cause, I mean, if you run a music podcast, that's what you end up doing. You end up being the hipster in the room who's like, I don't like the bass. Nah. That's essentially who I am. And that's not the problem I have with this album. I love the bass on the album. I remember like the track with Rich Brian on it, Lazy Susan. Man, that has some great bass. The rap performance was, a little lackluster, I think. But hey, it was still a banger of a time, so I can't complain. I don't know. My favorite track, if I had to pick, was man, it's leaving my brain right now. But the track between Zion T and Hoshino Gen, that was, I don't know where that collaboration came from, because Hoshino Gen, for those of you guys who don't know, is one of the biggest figures in Japanese pop right now. Like, he is like their Bruno Mars. Oh, that might be no overstatement. I don't know, but he is one of the main dudes in terms of male solo artists in J-pop. And then you have Zion T, who is at this point one of the most legendary K R&B artists in that aspect. And they played along with each other really, really nicely. And Zion T does have a very unique voice, and it felt very complimentary to each other. So I think that track works really, really well. A lot of the other artists had very, very nice performances as well. I know you're a huge BB fan. BB in general, I think does really, really a very solid job of portraying a certain vibe that's very mystique, and it's a good balance between mystique, sexy, at the same time kind of playful, and she really nails all that. Trying to think of other tracks in particular. At the end of the day, if you liked the stuff that comes out of 88 Rising normally, I think you probably would have had a good time with it. There was a lot of music that's a good mix of R&B, hip hop, lots of pop numbers as well. But at the end of the day, I haven't been the biggest 88 Rising fan, I'll be honest. And I was kind of running into a bit of a similar issue here and there, where I was like, this is a little generic, just a little bit. But man, at one point I tweeted about that album, and people are like, Warren, you shouldn't say that. The 88 Rising fans are gonna come. The ABG, the Rave Girls, ABGs, they're gonna come and kill you. If you're an ABG Rave Girl, please don't kill me. I'm being nice as possible. I don't know, man. I know a lot of these artists are like also your favorites. Like, I'm sure you had a great time with the album too. How'd you feel, man?
Yeah, no, I echo a lot of what you said about the way that the the album represented a lot of different cultures, a lot of different points of view from music, right? Because I think everyone likes to think of Asian music as this monolith of like it's all from Asia, so it's either all K-pop or J-pop, or you're getting a lot of music that sounds Western, that if you didn't know it was from an Asian artist, it would just be something that's played on the radio, which I think was an achievement in its own. Shout out to Never Gonna Come Down. That's the Mark Twain and BB song. That was a vibing song. I'm a big fan of that one. Shout out to GOT7 also. GOT7 is still around. That's a thing. So just wanted to give all the boy group fans some love. And I think my favorite song is is Warriors with Warren Hugh and Seori.
Okay.
The one that ends the album. Because that's there's a very epic feel to it. And it kind of fits with this whole kind of mythic feeling of the movie and the storytelling. But I will also agree with you a bit here that generic, sometimes people think that's a negative word. I think it's just a word that means similar relative to everything else that's out there, and that's not a bad thing, because I think in a lot of ways I think it's reflective of how you want this music to be accessible in addition to the movie, right? So you don't want anything that's like too experimental or too weird, but you want it to pair nicely with your experience with the different scenes, whether it's the action scenes, the fighting and the chase scenes, or the introspective moments where they're just kind of vibing, or kind of like the end sequences where it's kind of epic and just ends, the mythics.
If you return to the cultural aspect of the movie, where a lot of this is a big representation moment for Asian Americans and Chinese Americans, and if I think about what they listen to on a regular basis, there's a huge overlap here. There's a huge overlap. Like, I'm personally not very familiar with Nicki or Warren Hue, but at the same time, I know all my buddies are excited about them. I know they love Keshi. Like I know they love Rich Brian. So in that aspect, I think the OST album does a great job of capturing that. And plus, I feel like for people who are not familiar with certain people on the album, this is a great opportunity, a great gateway for them to kind of gain exposure. Like Sori, for instance, is someone I keep seeing over and over again, and I'm like, who is this person? I don't know who this person is. And after this album, I was like, okay, like she was kind of good. I should go check out more of her stuff. Rich Brian, I've known for a long time. Love the kid. But he I don't know why I mentioned him. But yeah, there you go. Great. It's a fine album. It's a really, really, really nice album. I don't know. Lazy Susan, man, has a banging beat. The pianos, man.
On that banging note, Warren, thank you so much for joining me. This was amazing. You had a wealth of knowledge with Marvel, Shang-Chi, with storytelling, with everything. Warren, just in general, I appreciate you being here, and there's really nothing else I can there's no other way I could be more grateful for you to be here.
No, I'm very, very honored to be here at this inaugural episode of Nerdverse. I feel like I didn't really know a lot of much about Marvel, but after this conversation, I'm like, man, I didn't think there's this much depth to my brain. There's a lot more wrinkles than I had expected. So no, thank you for leading the conversation and giving us this much stuff to talk about and think about with the movie, because it was a nice introspection and a retrospection at the movie. Yeah, just super honored to be here, man. Thank you for having me. This is great.
Yeah, man.
Super honored.
Excellent time. Warren, you got some things to plug away. What do you got for us?
K-pop, y'all. If y'all into K-pop, we do a podcast about K-pop. It's called SojuTalk Weekly K-pop Podcast, or SojuTalk. Just look it up in Google or Spotify or YouTube. We'll be there. If you have enjoyed my face, you will see more of it on YouTube. I'm sure you're in the minority there. But we do a weekly show about new releases, news articles, a lot of the trends and changes in K-pop we see on a very weekly basis. So if you want to stay in tune with what's going on in the world of that K-pop, come join us over there. Chris B has been doing a great job of running a community podcast over there as well, called SojuTalk Nation Podcast. But yeah, if you're into K-pop, come check us out. Let's SojuTalk, SojuTalk. That's me. Hey.
Yes, check us out. A lot of K-pop talk, a lot of music talks. If you liked what we talked about here at the end with music, Warren's got a lot of thoughts, a lot of opinions, a lot of spicy stuff, and it's all amazing. All right, Warren.
I promise I'm not the only person there. So if you didn't like me, but also like K-pop, you should still come check it out, because I'm not the only one there. We got other people too. So
yeah, shout out to Doug and Anita for joining you on that journey for 3+ years now. Man, you guys are killing it.
It's been a wild time.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening to the Nerdverse Adventures. Follow on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts, and find us on all the socials. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at Nerdverse Adventures. For Warren, this is Anton, and this has been the Nerdverse Adventures. Bye.
Bye, guys.